Good morning. Secretary General Bond, President Tilghman, distinguished guests, colleagues, some old friends, and visitors to campus. Welcome to the opening session of the 2009 Princeton Colloquium on Public and International Affairs. My name is Mark Watson, and I'm Interim Dean of the Woodrow Wilson School, the host of the Colloquium. This year's Colloquium is titled Prosperity or Peril, the Next Phase of Globalization. Through a series of panel sessions, keynote addresses, and featured presentations, we seek to understand how the latest phase of globalization, beginning at the end of the Cold War, will continue to unfold. Will nations seek to cut themselves off from a world that threatens to import more peril than promise, or will states redefine the meaning of borders and find genuinely global ways to confront common problems? This weekend, for our 7th annual Colloquium event, we have convened scholars, policymakers, and leaders in the private and nonprofit sectors to examine the impacts of the next phase of globalization on states, global society, and the planet. As our time is limited, it's my pleasure, as part of this welcome, to introduce Princeton University's President Shirley Tilghman, who will introduce the Secretary General. Shirley was named Princeton's 19th, or first president of the university in 2001, depending on how you think about it. President Tilghman's a professor of molecular biology and has been a member of the faculty of the university since 1986. During her tenure as president, she has overseen a significant expansion of Princeton's residential college system, the creation of a neuroscience institute, and a major new commitment to creative and performing arts, among other initiatives. She's also provided national leadership on issues related to higher education, federal science policy, and women in science. President Tilghman is a member of the National Academy of Sciences and chair of the Association of American Universities. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs, thank you for joining this year's Colloquium. And thank you, Secretary General Bond, for addressing our gathering this morning. Please join me in welcoming President Tilghman to the podium.
Thank you, Mark, and thank all of you for joining us as we open this year's Princeton Colloquium on Public and International Affairs. This year, the Woodrow Wilson School has brought together an outstanding group of speakers to address the theme of prosperity or peril, the next phase of globalization. When this topic was chosen many months ago, I suspect no one could have foreseen how urgent it would become. Whether prosperity or peril prevails, the worldwide economic crisis has vividly underscored the degree to which the world has indeed shrunk, and its people are so interdependent. And there is no one in a better position to remind us of our responsibility to work together, both as members of the family of nations and as stewards of our planet, than the Secretary General of the United Nations, Ban Ki-moon. Mr. Ban, who will discuss the imperative for a new multilateralism in his address this morning, assumed the reins of the United Nations on January the 1st, 2007, but has played an active role on the international stage for almost 40 years. The first Korean to lead the United Nations, Mr. Ban traces his dream of becoming a diplomat to a teenage encounter with President John F. Kennedy while visiting the United States under the auspices of a Red Cross program. After graduating from Seoul National University with a bachelor's degree in international relations, he joined his nation's foreign ministry, where he held a series of progressively more senior posts, from vice consul in New Delhi to ambassador to Austria, where he chaired the preparatory commission for the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty Organization, to foreign policy advisor to the Republic of Korea's president. In 2004, Mr. Ban became his nation's foreign minister, playing a key role in the 6-party talks designed to peacefully address the dangers posed by North Korea's nuclear weapons program. 2 years later, Mr. Ban rose to the top of a strong field of candidates intent on succeeding Kofi Annan as Secretary General, successfully avoiding all 5 Security Council vetoes and winning the acclamation of the General Assembly. In his inaugural address, he noted that the true measure of success for the UN is not how much we promise, but how much we deliver for those who need us most. And in his quiet but very determined way, he has sought to give substance to these words. Whether he is spearheading internal reforms, visiting strife-torn regions, or addressing global threats such as climate change, Mr. Ban has used his skills as a self-described harmonizer, balancer, mediator to build a more effective United Nations and a more humane and stable world. Mr. Secretary General, we wish you every success in the pursuit of these objectives, and we thank you for sharing your thoughts with us today. Your presence on our campus, which has welcomed Secretaries General stretching back to Trygve Lie, is not only an honor, it is also an affirmation of Princeton's commitment to serve our nation and all nations by encouraging the interplay of ideas in forums such as this. And now, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in extending the warmest of Princeton welcomes to the world's chief diplomat, Secretary General Ban Ki-moon.
Thank you, President Tilghman and Dean Watson, and dear professors and students, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure and honor for me to have this very precious opportunity to addressing the students and professors of such a prestigious and esteemed University of Princeton. I have been admiring the beautiful campus, not only the campus, but such a long history and prestigious university which has been leading this world, producing distinguished leaders of the future. As a Secretary General of the United Nations, I feel it a great pleasure to meet with so many students and professors who will be the leaders of our future. And I'm very much honored by all this big turnout of so many people. I was thinking, while I have been very much impressed and overwhelmed by your warm welcome, I was thinking while sitting here that one day when I retire from my job as Secretary General, I may have an opportunity of teaching students. In such case, I hope that my classroom will be as popular as this morning's turnout. Please remember me that I was here when I came back again. I think the United Nations owes a great debt to this prestigious university. Over the years, our work has been inspired by the great thinkers and leaders who have sat in these halls and paced down the corridors and shared their wisdom from this university's lecterns. The very concept of the United Nations can be attributed to one of the former presidents of the United States, and more importantly, one of the former presidents of this university, Woodrow Wilson. He called for nations to come together to make it, if I may quote from what he said, to make it safe for every peace-loving nation, which, like our own, wishes to live its own life, determine its own institutions, be assured of justice and fair dealing by the other people of the world, and be protected from force and selfish aggression. That call was heard in 1919. And if you go back to history, that call, what is known as the principle of self-determination, was heard even in halfway across the world, in Korea, in 1919, when Korea was under colonialism. That inspired the Korean people to fight for their independence. The first president of Korea, the Korean Republic, Dr. Seung-man, was a student here, and he got the PhD here. That we owe, Koreans owe very much. Now, that call was heard a quarter century later in the wake of the World War II. It resounds to today. Ladies and gentlemen, some of us in this room are old enough to remember the devastations of World War II, including myself. But as I see here, most of you were born after World War II. At the end of the war, the founding members of the United Nations looked out on a charred and shattered landscape and pledged, like Woodrow Wilson, to do better for the future of our world. They sought, in the words of the UN Charter, to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, to reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights, to establish conditions under which justice can be maintained, to promote social progress and provide better standards of life in larger freedom. Those founders salvaged the ruptured steel beams and fragmented the bricks of the League of Nations and built a new multilateralism framework, which I'm going to discuss with you this morning, which drew on the best of the past, but was designed to meet the needs of what changed the world today. Today we face a landscape shattered by global economic crisis and collapse, regional conflict, and escalating humanitarian needs. The images on our television screens are beginning to look frighteningly familiar. Starving women and children, people on the move in search of safety, food, and work, long unemployment lines, exhausted populations numbed by the rising violence and misery surrounding them. Absent decisive action at this time, I'm afraid that we face a real prospect of our existing system unraveling. The projections should alarm all of us. If I may cite a few examples, the number of hungry people going to bed every night has risen to more than 1 billion. The ranks of the unemployed could grow by more than 50 million only this year, by this year alone. Women are likely to bear the brunt. By the end of 2009, Africa's economy stands to lose twice as much in terms of percentage as Asia's economies lost during the financial crisis a decade ago. Last year's food crisis, you must have seen on TVs many very violent demonstrations for this food, skyrocketing food prices. We have seen at least 61 such social unrest all around the world, 23 of which were very, very violent, which has caused even fall of governments, like in Haiti. Climate change looms with potentially cataclysmic consequences. The bleak forecast also includes the continued spread of deadly disease, a possible decade of nuclear non-proliferations, the already dangerous rise in extremism, and the fallout of intrastate conflict. This toxic mix that could give rise to a full-blown crisis of political instability. For the world and its peoples, 2009 could be a make or break year. This is exactly what I talked to President Obama when I met him last month in the White House. Well, Mr. President, if we do not properly manage this situation, this could be a make or break year. So we must work together very closely. We must stop this descent. We must alter our path. But this requires a bold action together. The time has passed for incremental adjustment. We need a new vision, a new paradigm, and a new multilateralism. This is the subject which I'm going to talk with you. A multilateralism that is organized around delivering a set of global goods. A multilateralism that harnesses both power and principle. And new multilateralism that recognizes the interconnected nature of such global challenges. A multilateralism with institutions that have the necessary authority and resources. Early in my tenure as Secretary General, I asserted that the world faces a set of global threats that hold the key to our common future. These threats are contagious. They do not recognize the borders. They freely crosses the borders. They affect everyone, everywhere, and cannot be addressed by any one country in isolation. People often say that the United States is the biggest, the only superpower with the mightiest resources, but even the United States alone cannot address these issues. They can only be countered through a global effort, through a global response to provide a set of global public goods to all. These goods include a major push against poverty by delivering on the Millennium Development Goals, which we must accomplish by the year 2015. A restoration of peace and stability in troubled and war-ravaged regions. Action on climate change, advance in global health, counterterrorism, disarmament, and non-proliferation. To this list, we must add a global good that can no longer be taken for granted: global financial and economic stability. None of these issues is new, but their scope, the scale, and intensity take us into uncharted territories. Ladies and gentlemen, since World War II, major new actors have emerged on the world stage. The United Nations began with only 51. At that time, the United States was the single most important member state of the United Nations. We have now 192 member states based on sovereign equality. The voices calling for change have also risen in number. We must listen to those voices. Princeton's own Albert Hirschman, the famed development economist, once warned that members of the organization have two possible choices when they perceive that it is declining in value. one, you may exit, or they can voice their proposals for a better change. Exiting from the institutions that hold our global order together would lead to disaster. That means that our new multilateralism must listen to these voices and embrace new political realities. But it cannot privilege power at the expense of the weak, nor can it allow hollow representation to lead to paralysis. A choice between power and principle is a false one, it's not correct one. If we are to make our way through this perilous moment, we need to harness both. As we address the economic crisis, the G8 leaders and G20 leaders, they have a special responsibility to take remedial action. Yet they must also find a way to meet the popular aspirations of the billions of people who are not at the table. Similarly, in the realm of climate change, the key economies and major emitters must shoulder the greatest burdens. But if solutions are to be sustainable, they require a concerted action by all. And in the area of peacekeeping, this is one part of multilateralism again, the members of the Security Council have the primary responsibility for the maintenance of peace and security. But they also have a responsibility to ensure that the resources, human, financial, and material, and technical assistance and political will, those will be available to meet the Council's mandate. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we know then what we have to do. We know who has to do it. The question is how we do it. The new multilateralism must ensure that we do not address global challenge in isolation. That's what I have already explained. We cannot solve the economic crisis. We cannot solve the climate crisis and the food crisis and abject poverty issues in piecemeal fashion. We cannot provide clean energy and strengthen the non-proliferation regimes without considering the interrelationship of these challenges. We have to have a very comprehensive approach, realizing that all these global challenges are interconnected. For example, no solution to our economic crisis will be sustainable without a new climate change framework. Such a framework will need to attract investments in clean energy. Strategies for investing in clean energy, such as nuclear power, need to take into account non-proliferation and nuclear disarmament concerns. Similarly, any reliance on alternative fuels such as biofuels requires us to have strategies to keep clean energy from competing with feeding the hungry. Strengthening the United Nations must also be part of the picture. The financial crisis led G20 leaders to provide new authority and resources to the International Monetary Fund. It also prompted calls for reforms of IMF and World Bank, calls heard for years but galvanized only now. The United Nations must also be strengthened and reformed. In recent years, member states of the United Nations have given the United Secretariat and Secretary General an increased mandate. However, they have not provided us with the commensurate authority and resources. The very bitter, serious budget battles in recent years have taken us further from what we need. An effective and empowered instrument of service capable of meeting the dominant global challenges of the 21st century. Now let us discuss about all this new agenda for the multilateralism. The agenda is quite clear: to provide economic and financial stability for the United Nations, is leading the effort to achieve the Millennium Development Goals. This has 8 pillars, 8 purposes, starting from alleviating abject poverty in half by 2015 and providing decent educational opportunities and providing cure and support for all these HIV/AIDS and curable diseases, and ensuring gender balances, and ensuring partnership between government, business communities, and NGOs. There are many other important pillars which we must ensure the implementation by 2015. This is a long-term vision set out by our world leaders in 2000, commemorating the new millennium. That means ensuring that developing countries have access to at least $1 trillion in support. I was very much encouraged in London. The G20 leaders have agreed to mobilize at least additionally $1.1 trillion to help developing countries and to help other emerging economies to have easier access to all this financial support. It means, again, the donor countries, industrialized countries, meeting their aid commitment. It means taking a stand against protectionism. I'm sure that there are many economic professors here. Many of you must be taking economic courses. This protectionism, everybody knows that is a very short-sighted policies. But again, unfortunately, sadly, those G20 leaders who have firmly pledged to avoid protectionism in Washington, November last year, that at least 17 countries out of 20 are still practicing either form of the protectionism. To address climate change, we hope to agree a global deal by the end of December in Copenhagen, which can be acceptable to all the parties, industrialized and developing countries. We want not only to reduce emissions, but to help countries to adapt to and mitigate the inevitable effects of a changing environment. And we are working with the business and scientists to stimulate innovation and investment in green technologies for green growth. To deliver on global health, we are countering the assault on health funding by forging partnerships to build functioning and affordable health systems, promote maternal and child health, and take action on a range of diseases afflicting the world's poor. To deliver on counterterrorism, we are working with the states to implement the groundbreaking United Nations Global Counterterrorism Strategy. To deliver peace and security, we are working to align our capacities with our mandated responsibilities. A decade ago, when there was a blueprint for this strengthening the peacekeeping operations, UN had less than 20,000 peacekeepers, including civilians. Now that number exceeds 110,000, all throughout the world in 18 missions. I have heard this said often that I command the second largest deployed forces around the world, only next to the United States. That does not mean that the United Nations is a superpower. I'm not at all happy to have that number so high. The higher the number of peacekeeping, that means the greater the sign of global instability. And therefore, my target, my aim, is to reduce the number of peacekeeping missions, reduce the number of peacekeepers. But sadly, again, the factual life of us does not allow that. For the moment, of course, we face the challenge of keeping up the demand of peacekeeping. Without renewed commitment, again, we will be unable to do so. That is why we have also been working so hard to head off conflict before it erupts. The best way, as many of international political students must have studied, the best way is prevention. So preventive diplomacy, that should be the most effective, least costly one, most economic one. But people have been spending $7 and $8 billion a year to maintain these peacekeeping operations. If we were able to prevent this from erupting into such a conflict, then we could have saved a lot of, first of all, human lives and financial resources. And finally, to deliver on disarmament and non-proliferation, we welcome the leadership shown by another distinguished Princetonian, George Shultz, and his colleagues in advocating due progress towards a world free of nuclear weapons. I'm also very encouraged by the new move, new gestures of President Obama and President Medvedev of Russian Federation, that they are going to engage in reducing the number of proliferation. And President Obama has said in the Czech Republic a couple of weeks ago, that his aim is to make this world completely out of nuclear weapons. That's what United Nations and I are aiming to work together. We are urging all parties to Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, NPT, to fulfill their obligations under the treaty to pursue global disarmament. We are calling on members of the Security Council to initiate discussions on various issues, including on assurances to non-nuclear weapon states that they will not be the subject of the use or threat of use of nuclear weapons. And we are also calling on all member states to eliminate other weapons of mass destruction, impose limit on conventional arms, and adopt new weapons bans. I was again very much encouraged by new administration of Obama saying that they will try to ratify the CTBT, Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, where I once served as a chairman for 6 months, about 10 years ago. Ladies and gentlemen, dangerous social and political fuses have been lit. This may be alarming. Facing crisis on many fronts, the world is coming to grasp the need for a transition to sustainable development, to new levels of cooperation, and to a new multilateralism. One natural response to such challenges might be to look inward and protect our narrow interest. But we must not. Woodrow Wilson once said, if I may quote again, interest does not tie nations together. It sometimes separates them. But sympathy and understanding does unite them. To be honest with you, I'm reluctant to take issue with a statesman and hero like Woodrow Wilson, especially here on his turf. But the time has changed. We have to we're always provocative to always theories. But I suspect even Woodrow Wilson now would agree that today interest does indeed tie the world together. That is our 21st century reality. Nations may have been slow to realize it, but that is changing. We are all coming to understanding that none of the urgent challenges of our times can be solved without cooperation. It is incontestable that no nation, no matter how strong and resourceful, can solve these problems on its own, nor should it want to. There is a strength, not just efficiency, in sharing burdens. Solutions lie that way too. In an independent world, the common interest is a national interest. Either we will succeed together or fail alone. Therein lies the rationale, the imperative for a new multilateralism. Ladies and gentlemen, for my part as Secretary General, I'm determined to ensure that the United Nations can serve not only as an effective instrument of service for humankind, but as an agent for the transformation that the world needs to weather these troubled waters and troubled times through new multilateralism. I look to all of you for your support in that crucially important effort. And I thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you all the best under the leadership and wisdom of President Tilghman. Finally, I have been working very closely and inspired by all wisdom of President Tilghman as one of the Colloquium members of the university present, which, again, I'm looking forward to meeting and participating January next year. Thank you very much for your attention.
I'm happy to say that the Secretary General has agreed to take a few questions from students. So if you are a student and if you do have a question, please raise your hand and please wait for someone to come by with a mic. We have runners with mics. So I'm looking for hands. Aha. Oh, yes, right here.
Hello. How do you plan to depoliticize the United Nations in regional conflicts?
Depoliticize?
Yes, please, yeah.
Of course, there are many different opinions among member states, as United Nations is composed of 192 member states. They all come from a different background, different national interests, but I'm encouraged that they are all working for common prosperity and common development and stability and security of all human beings. Now, there are times, as we have seen particularly during the Cold War era, that the issues, regardless of what the substance of merit were, they have been politicized. That the role of the Secretary General is to harmonize and bridge the gap between all these differing opinions of the member states. It's very hard, very difficult and sensitive. And particularly when it comes to the positions of so-called P5, permanent members of the Security Council. As President Tilghman said, I skillfully avoided all these vetoes of 5 veto-wielding powers. It's very difficult But I think so far, I have been able to bridge all these gaps, and I have made a good contribution. That requires, first of all, you should base your judgment on principles. But sometimes, while you think this is principle, you need to very correctly, sensitively strike the balance between all these differences of opinions. That requires wisdom, experience. Still, I think I'm learning. Still, maybe one day I'll come back again to explain more in detail about how I have been doing. Thank you.
Gentleman right in the middle in the back there, blue.
You mentioned previously that sometimes in the past it's been difficult to get either financial or political support from certain members of the UN. Would you mind explaining a little of some of the problems you've had to go through and how you see in the future to be able to solicit a little more support from the members of the United Nations?
This is a very important aspect, how United Nations can function better. United Nations is operating on the funds contributed by member states. United States takes 22% of whole operational costs, including our own salaries. When it comes to peacekeeping operations, as one of the permanent members of the Security Council, United States takes even greater burden, 27% of whole. That is why United States sometimes have been quite critical about the United Nations, that United Nations have not been properly functioning more efficient and effectively, but we've been working very well. I would like to really urge the member states at this time that the political will of the member states is the key to make this United Nations function effectively and to address the challenges at the proper time, at proper way. But I see clearly some lack of political will. The political will, lack of political will means lack of financial support or critical assets, like many critical assets which we have to have from the member states. In the midst of all this economic climate, I know that the budget will be shrunken, and there will be a lack of resources available on the part of member states. That I've been really urging member states that it is important to keep their commitment, previous commitment. First of all, to support the United Nations, to support the poor countries, most vulnerable countries. There are at least more than 1 billion people who live a day with less than $1. This is very tragic, very, very moving if you meet them face to face. So far, I have been very much encouraged by the continuing commitment of the United States and member states. I hope you also talk to all American congressional leaders and administration leaders to urge them to continue their support. I've been speaking on many occasions that without strong support of the United States, United Nations cannot function properly. And that's my message today.
Back row.
Hello. Yeah, I'm from Madagascar, and a month ago there was a coup over there, and you mentioned people living with less than $1 a day. And Madagascar has about 70% of those, and that was one of the reasons for the coup. I was wondering how the UN can help find a resolution for countries like Madagascar to come out of the crisis, such as this one.
Unfortunately, recent days we have seen many unconstitutional changes of power in some part of Africa. We have seen it in Mauritania, we have seen it in Guinea, and we have seen it in Guinea-Bissau, then finally in Madagascar. On all these cases, United Nations have been working very closely with the African Union, who have also taken very strong principled positions that we will not allow the unconstitutional change of power. Whatever the differences there may be among people, those differences, political differences, should be addressed and resolved through peaceful means, through dialogue. This is a basic fundamental ground rule of the United Nations and international community. I have dispatched my special envoy to Madagascar at the time of this crisis, in close coordination with, of course, African Union. It's very unfortunate that Madagascar is one of the poor countries have been engulfed in this political struggle between the president and mayor of Madagascar. Again, we have not seen the resolution of this issue. I will continue to resolve this issue in a peaceful way. But it's basically up to the people of citizens of Madagascar who will choose their future.
Looking. Right over here. Yes, hand up there.
Sir, what are your thoughts on the role of small countries as leaders, perhaps through ideology rather than through power, during this crisis?
Now, during this global crisis, this is something which we have not experienced, at least during last almost 100 years, since the Great Depression in 1929. Therefore, we really need the global, very collective cooperations and wisdoms. In that regard, the initiative taken by G20 leaders was very timely and very appropriate. And I'm encouraged by such a strong will of leaders of G20. When I attended the first meeting in Washington and second meeting in London, then I have been attending, in fact, during the last 40 years of my diplomatic life, for many such multilateral meetings. But I was most encouraged during my participation in London Summit meeting, where I saw the older leaders were fully united. They were talking beyond their national interest. And they were only talking about the global responses, global crisis. That, I hope, will guide us to early recovery. There are many other issues. One may have a difference of ideology, a difference of political orientation, according to where you are coming from. I hope that when we are facing this global financial economic crisis, we have to learn from this. The lessons learned from this crisis will help international community be able to better address better the other challenges. My humble wish at this time is that if leaders could be united as they were in London in addressing global warming issues, climate change issues, which is even much more serious in terms of consequences. One may not see these consequences coming just next year or tomorrow or in 2 years' time. But it will come, and it has already been affecting us. But people are not simply responding to these global challenges. They are now responding to the challenges which they are being felt hurt, painful. Because of this economic crisis really gives all the pains to you, the leaders have been united. But when you see some challenges coming 10 years or 15 years or 20 years, people are not feeling still pain. But I do really hope that the leaders will really see the urgency of this issue. And it is the role of professors and students here, and particularly young students, who would be the leaders of our future generation, then it will come to you immediately. I may be okay after 10, 20 years, but when it comes to 30 years or 40 years, when whole this planet Earth will be impacted by this global warming impact, then after all, that's your world, your future. Therefore, I hope that you will take this issue very seriously. The question was a very brief one, but my answer is quite a broader one in a sense. And I'm giving you a certain message to particularly young students.
I think we have time for just one more question. And the lady right here.
Thank you very much. You mentioned that global issues cannot be addressed in isolation. But it seems that it's not only the member states who have this problem, but also UN agencies themselves. How would you evaluate the progress of the UN reform for agencies to work as one in the field?
I think that you've been following quite closely all what's happening in the United Nations. Thank you very much for your interest. That's exactly what, as the Secretary General of the United Nations, I have been putting emphasis and working very hard to make United Nations work and deliver as one. This United Nations is a huge organization. I do not claim that I know every corner of the United Nations. There are at least 16 specialized agencies where they have a different governing board, a different membership. They elected their heads through their governing board. And there are many, at least 7 funds and programs. There are many departments and many humanitarian agencies working all different global issues, starting from all this development and peace and security and human rights. Therefore, this is a whole huge. But these resources are being supported by the member states. It's not coming from our own pocket. It's coming from the pockets of all 192 member states, or sometimes from philanthropists and or business communities. But this money, every single dollar, every single cent must be spent to the purpose, most sparingly and most effectively. That's the imperative again, moral and political imperative at this time. That is why since 2 years ago, then I have been leading this campaign so that the whole United Nations work together as one team. While their purposes and missions may be different, we have to deliver as one United Nations. This is a big one theme. For that purpose, I convene twice every year what is known as a Chief Executive Board Coordination Meeting, CEB meeting, where all the heads of the United Nations, including Bretton Woods institutions, including the World Bank president and managing director of IMF. They all come together where I become the president, chairman, and discuss how United Nations can meet this goal of working as one. That's very important. I think we have made a great progress, but there are still many areas for improvement. That's what I'm doing. Thank you very much for your support. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.